All right. Historically, Washington lands were controlled by burning. However, back in the 18th century, really beginning in 1908, with the creation of the Washington Forest Fire Association, policies of total fire suppression began to take place. Fire suppression policies are good at stopping very small wildfires, but they're not as good as stopping the really big destructive ones that, in fact, people were trying to avoid with these fire suppression. Luckily, in around 1970, people began to listen to science and these policies were abandoned. Fast forward to 2020, and Washington State Department of Natural Resources doesn't have that much information on Western Washington residents. They have a lot of information on Eastern Washington. They're able to create a lot of really good statewide plans and Eastern Washington plans, Eastern Washington fire plans, and land management. But it's a little more tricky for Western Washington when you just don't have that baseline information. And the internship objective really was to just get that information. A little bit of relevance. Some people might think that Western Washington, because it's green, it's wet, it's cold, that fires wouldn't really happen. Eastern Washington, it's dry, it's hot, fires happen there all the time. But no, not here in Western Washington. Well, in 2017, the North Peak fire ended up having half of its coverage west of the Cascades. And that's why getting this wildfire information and education is important, and it'll help. This project will help guide future DNR research and be able to perform more tailored outreach. And that was figure 1. So, research question. This project is looking at Seattle metropolitan residents, which again is King County, Snohomish County, and Pierce County. And it's looking at those residents who recreate frequently in central and eastern Washington. The reason that specific population was chosen is because this is a transient population or transition population, and that might be taking the knowledge and behaviors from Eastern Washington and transferring over to Western Washington, or vice versa, from Western Washington to Eastern Washington. And they're two very different fire regimes, so we don't want that. Methods. So this project started out with a literature review, which was a review on studies of wildfire risk, review on how factors influencing perception, influencing behavior, and then some books on background information of Washington fire regimes, because before this internship, I didn't know anything about wildfire. And then the main part of this project was the survey. This was a 10-minute online or in-person survey questionnaire, although it was taken online. And this was looking at data on recreation location, activity, behaviors, perception, awareness. And there were 3 different in-person locations chosen. It was REI downtown, Snoqualmie Pass, and Nason Creek. Now the reasons for these is, starting with REI, this is a area that has sees a lot of recreationers and has a really good supply of recreation stuff, recreation supplies and bikes and that type of things. Now, to get from Western Washington to Eastern Washington, which was that population we were looking at, there's 2 main routes. One is I-90 and the other is US Route 2. For I-90, we found the best rest stop for getting people, the one with the most amount of recreationalists, was Snoqualmie Pass. And the same goes for US Route 2. Looking at figure 3, this was Nason Creek. Had just a little more people in it than some of the other rest stops nearby. Finally is the analysis, which is data analysis, just going through the results. And this was mainly, for my project, mainly exploratory data analysis, which is just trying to see what that baseline information is and seeing maybe what sort of stuff there is. But it also did just a little bit of relationship finding, which is seeing what sort of factors are correlated with others, or what sort of factors influence each other, not quite at what this causes this, not there yet. So the results, what did I find? Starting out with figure 4, we have a pie chart of how long people have lived in the Seattle area, and this mainly tells that people have lived here for a while. Note that that really big chunk, the 20 or more year, is 48.1 or 48.41. Almost half of all the respondents have lived here 20 or more years. Figure 6 is a map of where people like to recreate. Note again that there is a lot of people in that Cascade corridor, Also, while this was intended to be looking at central and eastern Washington, because people who frequently recreate there, that's what we're looking for, it was a fill in the blank question. So if you give a fill in the blank question, people's results are going to be wherever they want. Next, at figure 6, we have what are the long-term effects of wildfire localized in your primary recreation activity location. And this is basically just seeing if for people's recreation locations, what do they think a close wildfire is going to do the most damage to? And number 1 and number 2 responses were wildlife habitat and plant habitat. And then figure 7 is how informed are you of wildfire preparedness? Maybe not a big surprise. Most people say that they're informed. And combining informed with very informed gives us 63% of the response. So going over the results summary, we have 48.41 of respondents lived in the area 20 or more years, figure 4. Most respondents recreate in that Cascade range, figure 5, and most respondents believe that wildfire has a strong effect on wildlife and plant habitat, figure 6. Now, informed or very informed, that ended up being that 63%, was the majority. People say that they know what they're talking about with wildfire preparedness. Now, what we did in this survey was we put in 3 different accuracy questions, which how it was just multiple choice questions that had a right answer and had a wrong answer. And these were related to wildfire preparedness and wildfire risk. Now, looking at figure 8, the results of how people informed say they were don't exactly match up with that. We see for getting at least one question right is that 63% again, which was about 100 respondents, but then getting 2 right almost cuts it in half with 37%. Getting all 3 of the questions, just 3 questions, was 2.5%, or 4 respondents out of the 200, so 4 people. So what does this all mean? Well, many people have lived in here for 20 or more years, but they may not be familiar with Eastern Washington's fire regime that they're recreating in. To ensure that some of these at-risk communities have adequate knowledge, it's suggested that the DNR improve outreach targeting for these communities. Now, many people are concerned with plant and animal habitat, but they're also concerned with accessibility of the location and the general aesthetic. When the DNR conducts their outreach, it is important to capture what people care most about. And that's why including these types of messages and ideas into their outreach will more effectively get people on board, getting them to do what they need to do. So more education needs to occur to have just that correct information about wildfire risk. There was a really big disconnect between what people thought they were informed and how they ended up doing on the test. And that's a dangerous discrepancy when people are going between different fire regimes. Finally, more research needs to be done. That's probably something you've heard of every single one of these. More research really does need to occur. I did do a pretty good study of the Seattle metropolitan area, but that is not all of Western Washington. There are a lot of communities, far and wide, that the DNR just doesn't have any information on. And I think before a lot of that good tailored outreach, before a lot of very specific maps and education can be made by the DNR, what really needs to happen is to get a full baseline understanding of Western Washington residents. And of course, for the acknowledgments, I want to thank friends, family, site supervisor Ashley, and faculty advisor Claire, but also the Washington State Department of Recreation and REI for their gracious allowance of me using their facilities.